I had just finished a long day at work, drained and eager to get home. The drive back was uneventful, the usual traffic and radio chatter filling the silence. As I pulled into the driveway, the warm glow of the living room lights greeted me, a small comfort that made the weariness of the day fade away. I grabbed my briefcase from the passenger seat and stepped out, noticing how quiet the neighborhood was tonight. It was one of those moments where everything seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful. Unlocking the front door, I stepped inside to find Sarah, my wife, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine. She looked up, flashing me a smile that, while warm, seemed a bit strained. "Long day?" she asked, her voice laced with something I couldn't quite place. "Yeah, you could say that," I replied, loosening my tie and moving towards the kitchen. "How about you?" "Oh, just the usual," she said, her tone light but distant. She took a sip of her wine and glanced at her phone, something she'd been doing a lot lately. As I poured myself a drink, I couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in Sarah over the past few weeks. She was more distant, often lost in thought or distracted by her phone. I tried to brush it off as work stress. Her job as an executive assistant could be demanding, especially since her boss, David, had recently been promoted and was likely piling on the pressure. "Anything exciting happened today?" I asked, trying to engage her in conversation. She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not really, just the same old stuff." There it was again, that strange note in her voice. She was hiding something, but I couldn't figure out what. We settled into our usual evening routine, dinner in front of the TV, discussing the latest Netflix series we were hooked on. But even as we laughed at the show's antics, I could feel the distance between us, a gap that seemed to widen with each passing day. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I felt the urge to reach out to her, to ask if something was wrong. But before I could, she turned off the bedside lamp and murmured, "Good night," her back already turned to me. "Good night," I replied, though sleep didn't come easily. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind turning over the small oddities I had been noticing. The way she had become more secretive, the phone that never left her side, and the texts she seemed to hide from me. It was probably nothing, I told myself, just my imagination running wild after a stressful day. But a nagging feeling had taken root in my gut, a whisper of doubt that wouldn't go away. The next morning, I woke up to find Sarah already gone. A note on the kitchen counter informed me that she had left early for work. Something about an urgent meeting. I shrugged it off, though the lingering doubt from the night before was still there. I tried to focus on my own work, pushing thoughts of Sarah and her strange behavior to the back of my mind. The day passed in a blur of meetings and paperwork. By the time I got home, I was exhausted. Sarah wasn't back yet, which was unusual, but I figured she was probably working late. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat down on the couch, turning on the TV more for background noise than anything else. An hour passed, and still no sign of her. I checked my phone, expecting a message, but there was nothing. Just as I was about to call her, the front door opened, and Sarah walked in looking flustered. "Hey, sorry I'm late," she said quickly, avoiding my gaze. "Work was crazy today." "It's fine," I said, though her rushed explanation didn't sit well with me. "You all right?" "Yeah, just tired," she replied, brushing off my concern. She kissed me on the cheek, a quick, perfunctory gesture, then disappeared upstairs to change. I sat there sipping my beer, my mind racing. Something was definitely off, but I had no idea what it could be. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But as the evening wore on, the feeling only grew stronger. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention to Sarah's behavior. She was still distant, and I noticed more signs that something was wrong. Missed calls from unknown numbers, late-night texts that she quickly hid from me, and a vague tension in the air whenever she was around. I wanted to confront her, to ask if something was going on, but a part of me was afraid of what I might find out. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, I noticed her phone buzzing on the counter. She was in the shower, so I picked it up, intending to bring it to her. But as I glanced at the screen, I saw a message preview from someone named D. "Miss you already," it read, followed by a heart emoji. My heart skipped a beat. Who was D? And why was he sending my wife messages like that? I stared at the phone, torn between the urge to read more and the fear of what I might find. But before I could decide, Sarah stepped out of the bathroom, a towel wrapped around her. "What are you doing with my phone?" she asked, her tone sharp. It buzzed, and I was just bringing it to you," I stammered, quickly handing it over. She snatched it from me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Thanks," she muttered, then quickly turned away, tapping out a reply as she walked back into the bedroom. I stood there, a cold dread settling in my stomach. This wasn't just my imagination. Something was definitely wrong. But I wasn't sure how to confront her, or if I even wanted to. The possibility that Sarah might be hiding something from me, something serious, was too painful to consider. But as the days went on, the signs became harder to ignore, and I knew I couldn't just keep pretending everything was fine. Something was about to break, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same. The following week was a blur of tension and unanswered questions. Every time I tried to bring up anything remotely related to what I had seen on Sarah's phone, she either changed the subject or brushed me off with vague excuses. It was like living with a stranger, the woman I had loved for years now slipping further and further away from me. The strain was taking its toll on both of us. I started staying late at work, finding excuses to avoid coming home. The house, once a place of warmth and comfort, now felt cold and unfamiliar. The silence between us grew louder with each passing day, a constant reminder that something was deeply wrong. One evening, after another tense and quiet dinner, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The air was crisp, a faint chill signaling the onset of autumn. As I wandered through the neighborhood, my thoughts kept circling back to Sarah and the message from Dee. I knew I couldn't keep ignoring this. I had to do something, but I was paralyzed by fear. Fear of what I might discover, and fear of what it would mean for us. I ended up at a small park, sitting on a bench under a dim street lamp. The shadows around me seemed to echo the darkness growing in my mind. I needed to talk to someone, to get some perspective on what was happening. Without thinking, I pulled out my phone and dialed Mark, my best friend since college. "Hey Tom, what's up?" Mark's voice was warm, familiar, and instantly comforting. "Hey Mark, I needed to talk to someone," I said, my voice sounding more desperate than I intended. "Sure, man. What's going on?" I hesitated, unsure of where to start. "It's Sarah. I think something's going on with her. Something bad." There was a pause on the other end, then Mark's voice, more serious now. "What do you mean? What's been happening?" I took a deep breath and told him everything. The late nights, the secretive texts, the message from Dee. Mark listened without interrupting, letting me get it all out. When I finished, there was a long silence. Finally, Mark spoke. "Tom, I'm really sorry you're going through this. It doesn't sound good, I won't lie, but you need to find out the truth. You can't just let this eat away at you." "I know," I replied, my voice hollow, "but I don't know how to confront her. What if she's really doing something behind my back?" "Then you need to know," Mark said firmly. "Living in the dark won't help either of you. Look, maybe there's an explanation, but you have to get to the bottom of this. Whatever happens, you'll deal with it." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "You're right. I need to know. But how?" "Start with small steps," Mark suggested. "Maybe talk to her when she's calm, not right after work when she's stressed. Or, if you really think she's hiding something, you could try finding out on your own." I knew what he was implying, and as much as I hated the idea, it seemed like the only way. "You mean spy on her?" "Call it what you want, but yeah," Mark said. "You need to know, Tom, whatever it takes." The next morning, I woke up with a sense of grim determination. I couldn't keep living like this, drowning in uncertainty and suspicion. I needed answers, and if Sarah wasn't going to give them to me, I'd have to find them myself. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and spent the day preparing. First, I went online and ordered a set of small, discreet cameras, ones that could easily be hidden around the house. They would arrive in a couple of days. Next, I did some research on her phone, how to access it, how to see messages that might be hidden from me. It felt wrong, violating her privacy like this, but the gnawing doubt inside me was too strong to ignore. By the time Sarah came home, I had everything planned out. She walked in, tired as usual, and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice casual. "Not bad," I replied, forcing a smile. "How about yours?" "Busy," she said, setting her bag down and heading upstairs. "I'm going to take a shower." I watched her go, my heart heavy. I knew I should just ask her, confront her directly, but I was terrified of what she might say. Instead, I decided to wait for the cameras. It would be easier to deal with the truth if I saw it with my own eyes. The next few days were agonizing. I tried to act normal, but every time Sarah looked at me, I wondered if she could see through my facade. I became hyper-aware of her every move, every word, searching for clues. But she remained as distant as ever. Finally, the cameras arrived. I spent the evening carefully placing them around the house. One in the living room, another in the kitchen, and a third in our bedroom. I felt a pang of guilt as I hid the last one in the corner of the room, but I pushed it down. This was necessary. That night I lay in bed, unable to sleep. Sarah was beside me, her breathing steady and slow. I glanced at her, the woman I had loved for so long, and wondered how we had gotten to this point. Had I failed her somehow? Had I missed the signs that something was wrong? As I drifted off to sleep, one thought echoed in my mind. Soon, I would know the truth. The next day, I left for work as usual, though my mind was miles away. All I could think about were the cameras and what they might capture while I was gone. By the time I got home, I was a bundle of nerves. Sarah was already in the kitchen preparing dinner. She greeted me with a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "How was work?" "Same old," I replied, my voice tight. "You?" "Busy, but fine," she said, turning back to the stove. I stood there for a moment watching her. She seemed so normal, so familiar. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. I needed to check the cameras, to see if there was anything unusual. But I knew I couldn't do it with her around. After dinner, I made an excuse about needing to finish some work in the study and retreated to my computer. My hands shook as I opened the camera app and started reviewing the footage. At first, everything seemed ordinary. Sarah went about her usual routine, coming home, changing clothes, making dinner. But then, about an hour before I got home, she received a call. I watched as she picked up her phone, glanced at the screen, and smiled. A real, genuine smile that I hadn't seen in weeks. She answered the call, her voice soft and affectionate. "Hi, David." I froze. David, her boss, the one person who had been taking up so much of her time lately. As I watched, Sarah's expression softened, her tone becoming more intimate than I had ever heard it. "I miss you too," she said, her voice a whisper. "But you know we have to be careful." My heart pounded in my chest. This was it, the proof I had been dreading. Sarah was having an affair, and it wasn't just with anyone, it was with her boss. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My entire world shattered in that moment, the pieces of my life falling apart like a house of cards. How could she do this? How could she betray me like this? I sat there, staring at the screen, unable to move. The woman I loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. And as the pain of her betrayal tore through me, another feeling began to take its place. A burning, white-hot anger. Sarah had lied to me, deceived me, and broken our vows. But she wasn't the only one. David, her boss, the man I had trusted, was just as guilty. And as the anger took hold, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to confront them, I was going to make them pay. The discovery of Sarah's affair with David left me shattered, but in that moment of despair, something dark and determined began to grow inside me. I wasn't just going to be another victim. If Sarah and David thought they could get away with this, they were wrong. I was going to make sure they paid for what they had done. Not just emotionally, but in a way that would leave them reeling. The next morning, I woke up feeling a sense of cold clarity. I was done with doubt. Done with feeling sorry for myself. It was time to take control. As I got ready for work, I noticed Sarah was already up, sipping her coffee at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I entered the room, her expression neutral. "Morning," she said casually, as if nothing was wrong. "Morning," I replied, keeping my tone just as casual. I wasn't going to give her any hint of what I knew. Not yet. As we exchanged small talk, I felt a strange detachment, as though I was watching our interaction from outside my body. It was surreal, knowing what I knew and pretending everything was normal. But I was good at pretending, I realized. I'd have to be if my plan was going to work. After a quick breakfast, I left for work, my mind already racing with ideas. I couldn't go on living like this, but confronting them outright wasn't enough. I needed to hit them where it hurt, to destroy what they had together, and I knew just how to do it. Over the next few days, I began to put my plan into motion. The first step was gathering more evidence. I needed to be sure of their affair, to know exactly how deep it ran and how I could use it against them. The cameras I had installed were a good start, but I needed more. I started by hacking into Sarah's email and social media accounts, something I'd never imagined I would do. It wasn't as hard as I thought. She'd always been careless with her passwords, and once I was in, the floodgates opened. There were dozens of emails and messages between her and David, each one more damning than the last. They had been meeting for months, sneaking around behind my back, sharing intimate details of their encounters. Each message I read was like a knife to the heart, but I forced myself to keep going. I needed everything, every piece of evidence that would help me bring them down. It wasn't just the affair I uncovered. David had been using his position to manipulate Sarah, promising her promotions and perks in exchange for keeping their relationship quiet. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep their deception went. It wasn't just a fling. It was a calculated, premeditated betrayal. But I wasn't the only one who could play that game. If David wanted to use his power to manipulate, I could do the same. I spent the next week carefully crafting my plan. I knew I couldn't act too quickly. I needed to be patient, to make sure everything was in place before I made my move. First, I had to set the stage. I began by reaching out to a few of David's business associates, people I knew through mutual connections. I played the part of the concerned friend, dropping subtle hints about David's questionable behavior at work, his inappropriate relationship with an employee. It wasn't long before rumors started to spread. Next, I gathered all the evidence I'd collected, emails, texts, recordings from the cameras, and compiled it into a neat little package. I made sure to include the most incriminating pieces, the ones that would do the most damage. Then I began to send them out, anonymously of course, to a few key players at David's company. HR, his superiors, anyone who had the power to make his life miserable. It was only a matter of time before the fallout began. The first sign that my plan was working came one evening, as Sarah and I were sitting down to dinner. She had been unusually quiet all day, her phone silent for once. I could tell something was bothering her, but I played dumb, asking about her day as if I didn't already know. "It was fine," she said, her voice tight. She pushed her food around on her plate, not meeting my eyes. "Just busy, you know?" "Yeah, I get it," I said, pretending to sympathize. "You seem a little off, though. Everything okay?" She looked up at me, her eyes flickering with something like fear. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just a lot going on at work." I nodded, hiding my satisfaction. I knew exactly what was going on at work. David was in trouble, and it was only the beginning. Over the next few days, the tension in the house grew palpable. Sarah was on edge, constantly checking her phone, snapping at me over the smallest things. I could see the strain in her eyes, the cracks starting to form in her carefully maintained facade. She was worried, and she had every reason to be. One evening, she came home looking particularly rattled. She barely said a word to me, heading straight for the bedroom. I waited a few minutes, then followed her, my heart pounding. I could hear her on the phone, her voice low and urgent. "What do you mean they know?" she hissed. "How could they find out? David, this is a disaster! No, you listen to me. If this gets out, we're both finished. You have to fix this." I stood outside the door, a cold smile spreading across my face. It was working. The pressure was getting to them, and it wouldn't be long before everything came crashing down. But I wasn't done yet. As satisfying as it was to watch them squirm, I wanted more. I wanted David to pay. Not just professionally, but physically. He had taken something from me, and I was going to take something from him in return. I started by digging into David's personal life. It didn't take long to find out where he lived, what kind of car he drove, even the route he took to work every day. I knew I was crossing a line, but at this point I didn't care. This was about revenge, pure, unadulterated revenge. One night, I followed him. It was easier than I expected. He was predictable. taking the same route home every evening. I kept my distance, careful not to be seen. My heart raced as I tailed him, a mix of adrenaline and anticipation coursing through me. When he finally pulled into his driveway, I parked a few houses down and waited. I knew Sarah wasn't with him. She was still at home, probably pacing the living room, trying to figure out what to do. David got out of his car and headed towards his house, oblivious to the fact that I was watching. I waited until he was inside, then made my move. Slipping out of my car, I approached his house, careful to stay in the shadows. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest, but I kept going. I had come this far. There was no turning back now. When I reached his car, I took out the tool I had brought with me, a small knife, sharp enough to do some real damage. With one swift motion, I slashed his tires, the rubber hissing as it deflated. I moved quickly, slashing all 4 tires before stepping back to admire my work. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As I slipped back into my car, I felt a rush of satisfaction. This was just the beginning. David and Sarah had no idea what was coming, but they would soon find out. The next day, I watched Sarah closely, waiting for the moment when she would find out about David's car. It didn't take long. Around lunchtime, she received a call, her face going pale as she listened. "What? No, that's impossible," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Are you sure?" Okay, I'll be there as soon as I can." She hung up, her hands shaking as she grabbed her things. "I have to go," she said hurriedly, not even looking at me. "Something happened at work." I nodded, pretending to be concerned. "Is everything okay?" "No, it's not," she muttered, more to herself than to me. "I'll explain later." With that, she rushed out the door, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I could only imagine what was going through her mind right now. The confusion, the fear, the uncertainty. It was exactly what I wanted. But this was just the beginning. I had more planned for them, and soon enough they would realize that they had messed with the wrong person. They had taken everything from me, and now it was time for me to take it all back. As I sat there, a cold resolve settled over me. I had started this, and I wasn't going to stop until both Sarah and David were left with nothing. The following weeks were a whirlwind of tension, lies, and calculated moves. Sarah was growing more frantic with each passing day, while I played the role of the concerned husband, always a step ahead of her. I could see the cracks widening in her composure, the fear in her eyes whenever her phone buzzed, or she received another call from David. It was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. One evening, Sarah came home late. Again. Her hair was disheveled, and her eyes were red-rimmed as if she had been crying. She didn't even bother with an excuse this time, just muttered something about work and went straight to the bathroom. I watched her go, feeling a mix of anger and satisfaction. The guilt was eating away at her, and I was glad. She deserved every bit of it. But I wasn't done yet. I had already begun setting the next phase of my plan into motion. A plan that would not only destroy David's career, but also ensure that he paid dearly for what he had done to me. It started with a carefully crafted letter, typed up on a computer at an internet cafe to avoid any trace back to me. The letter contained a series of accusations against David, all supported by the evidence I had gathered. It painted a picture of a man who abused his power, manipulated his employees, and engaged in unethical behavior. But it didn't stop there. I also hinted at financial improprieties, suggesting that David had been embezzling money from the company. I mailed the letter to the board of directors, ensuring it would land on the desk of someone who couldn't ignore it. I knew they would investigate. There was no way they could sweep something like this under the rug. And once they started digging, they would find exactly what I wanted them to find. Next, I turned my attention back to Sarah. She had been on edge ever since the incident with David's car, and I could tell she was close to breaking. I needed to push her further, to make sure she was as vulnerable as possible when the final blow came. I began by planting small seeds of doubt in her mind, subtly questioning her decisions, her choices, her worth. I played on her insecurities, making her feel like she was losing control of everything around her. I even started talking about taking a break, hinting that maybe we needed some time apart to figure things out. At first, she resisted, insisting that everything was fine, that we just needed to work through it. But as the days went on, I could see the fear in her eyes growing, the realization that she was losing me, losing everything, and I made sure to remind her, in small, seemingly innocuous ways, that it was all her fault. One night, as we sat on the couch in silence, I casually mentioned that I had been thinking about leaving town for a while. Maybe it's time I took that work trip I've been putting off, I said, keeping my tone light. Might be good for both of us, you know? Some space to think. Sarah's face paled. Tom, you're not serious, are you? I mean, things aren't that bad, are they? I shrugged, avoiding her gaze. I don't know, Sarah. I just feel like we're drifting apart. Like maybe we need some time to figure out what we really want. She stared at me, her eyes wide with panic. Tom, please don't say that. I know things have been rough lately, but we can work through this. We've been through worse. I almost laughed at that. She had no idea how wrong she was. Maybe, I said noncommittally. But I think I need some time to figure things out. She reached out, grabbing my hand. Tom, please, let's talk about this. Don't just leave. I looked at her, my expression carefully blank. I'm not leaving yet, Sarah, but I need to think about what's best for both of us. And maybe that means taking some time apart. She looked like she was about to cry, but I didn't care. I was done pretending, done caring about her feelings. This was all part of the plan, and I wasn't going to let anything get in the way. The next day, I left for work early, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. I knew she would spend the day agonizing over what I had said, replaying our conversation in her mind, wondering if she was about to lose me for good. And that was exactly what I wanted. At the office, I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept wandering to the events I had set in motion, the inevitable fallout that was coming. I kept my phone close, waiting for the call that would confirm my plan was working. It came just before lunch, a call from Mark, who had always been good at keeping tabs on what was happening in our social circle. Tom, you're not going to believe this, he said, his voice low and urgent. David's in big trouble. I heard from a guy at the company. They're investigating him for embezzlement and misconduct. Apparently, someone sent in a letter with a ton of evidence. I felt a surge of satisfaction, though I kept my tone neutral. Wow, that's crazy. Do they know who sent the letter? No idea, Mark replied. But they're taking it seriously. David's been put on leave, and there's talk of criminal charges. This could be the end of his career. I could hear the excitement in Mark's voice, but I didn't share it. For me, this wasn't about justice or schadenfreude. It was about revenge. Yeah, that's wild, I said. I guess we'll see what happens. We talked for a few more minutes, but my mind was elsewhere, already planning the next step. David's career was about to implode, but I wasn't done with him yet. There was one more thing I needed to do to make sure he paid for what he had done. That evening, I came home to find Sarah pacing the living room, her face pale and drawn. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes filled with fear. Tom, we need to talk, she said, her voice trembling. I sighed, setting down my bag. Sarah, I'm tired. Can we do this later? No, we need to talk now, she insisted, her voice rising. I know what's been going on. I know about the investigation at David's company. He told me everything. My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my expression neutral. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb with me, Tom, she snapped, her eyes blazing with anger. I know you're behind this. I don't know how, but I know you're the one who sent that letter. You've been spying on us, haven't you? I stared at her, my mind racing. This wasn't how I had planned to reveal everything, but maybe it was time. Maybe it was time for her to know just how far I was willing to go. I crossed the room, closing the distance between us. So what if I have? I said, my voice cold. What did you expect, Sarah? Did you really think you could cheat on me with your boss and get away with it? Did you think I wouldn't find out? She recoiled as if I had slapped her, her eyes filling with tears. Tom, please. It's not what you think. Don't lie to me, I shouted, my anger boiling over. I've seen the texts, the emails. I've heard the phone calls. I know everything, Sarah. Everything. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. Tom, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. David and I, we were just... You were just what? I spat. Having a little fun on the side. You betrayed me, Sarah. You betrayed us, and now you're going to pay for it. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Please, Tom, don't do this. Don't throw everything away. We can fix this. There's nothing left to fix, I said coldly. You made your choice. and now you have to live with the consequences." She stared at me, her eyes wide with terror. "What are you going to do?" I leaned in close, my voice barely above a whisper. "You'll see." The next day, I put the final part of my plan into action. I called in a few favors, pulled some strings, and made sure that David would be in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was easier than I thought. He was so desperate to clean up the mess I had created that he wasn't thinking clearly, wasn't paying attention to the danger he was in. That evening, I received the call I had been waiting for. David had been in a car accident. Serious, but not fatal. He was in the hospital, unconscious, with a long road to recovery ahead of him. I hung up the phone, a cold smile spreading across my face. It was done. David was out of the picture, his career in ruins, his body broken. And Sarah, well, she was next. When I got home, she was sitting in the living room staring blankly at the wall. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and desperation. "Tom, what did you do?" I didn't answer her. I just walked past her, heading for the stairs. "Get out, Sarah," I said over my shoulder. "Pack your things and leave. I don't ever want to see you again." She didn't move, just sat there, staring at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Tom, please." "Get out," I repeated, my voice hard as steel. "Now." She finally stood, her hands shaking as she wiped away her tears. "Tom, I'm sorry." But I wasn't listening anymore. I was already upstairs, already thinking about the life I was going to build without her, without the pain she had caused. She was just another mistake, one I was ready to leave behind. As I heard the front door close behind her, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was over. The lies, the betrayal, the pain. It was all over. And now it was time to move on. But as I sat in the quiet of the empty house, a new thought began to creep into my mind. A thought that I hadn't considered until now. Was it really over? Or had I just set something even darker into motion? The house was unnervingly silent after Sarah left, a stark contrast to the turmoil of the past few weeks. I had expected to feel a sense of closure, some kind of peace now that she was gone and David was out of the picture. But instead, there was only emptiness, a cold, gnawing void that refused to be filled. I wandered through the house, every room a reminder of what had once been and what I had destroyed. The kitchen where we used to cook together, laughing as we tried new recipes. The living room where we'd spent countless nights curled up on the couch, watching movies and talking about our dreams for the future. The bedroom where we had shared so many intimate moments now felt like a mausoleum, haunted by the ghosts of our past. I had wanted revenge, and I had gotten it, but as I stood in the emptiness of the house, I realized that I had also lost something I could never get back. It wasn't just Sarah or the life we had built together. It was a part of myself, a part that I had sacrificed in my quest to make her pay. I thought back to the moment when I had made the decision to destroy David. It had felt right, justified even, after everything he had done. But now, with the deed done and no one left to blame, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed. The days that followed were a blur of monotony. I went through the motions of daily life, but everything felt hollow. Work became a distraction, a way to keep myself from thinking about what I had done. But even that began to lose its effectiveness. I found myself staying late at the office, avoiding the empty house that awaited me. But the sense of unease only grew stronger. One evening, after another long day at work, I returned home to find a letter waiting for me on the kitchen table. The sight of it stopped me cold. There was no return address, just my name scrawled across the envelope in a familiar looping script, Sarah's handwriting. My heart pounded in my chest as I tore open the envelope, pulling out a single sheet of paper. The letter was short, but every word felt like a punch to the gut. "Tom, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I couldn't leave without saying this. I'm sorry for everything. For what I did to you, to us. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I know I've lost the right to ask for anything from you. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you, even when I made the worst mistake of my life. You were right to make me leave, and I won't bother you again. But please, don't let this destroy you. Don't let the anger and the pain consume you the way it did me. I know you're stronger than that. I just hope you find peace, even if it's without me. Goodbye, Tom. Sarah. I stood there, staring at the letter, my hands shaking. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I hadn't cried since this whole nightmare began. But now, the floodgates opened, and I couldn't hold it back any longer. I collapsed onto the floor, clutching the letter, the weight of everything I had done crashing down on me. I had wanted to make her pay, to make her suffer the way she had made me suffer. But now, with her gone, all I felt was an overwhelming sense of loss. I had lost Sarah, but more than that, I had lost myself. In the days that followed, I tried to bury myself in work, in anything that would keep me from thinking about the letter. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the feeling that I had gone too far, that I had unleashed something dark inside me, something that I couldn't control. I began to have nightmares, vivid and terrifying, where I would relive the events of the past few weeks in gruesome detail. But in these dreams, the roles were reversed. I was the one being hunted, being punished for what I had done. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, unable to shake the feeling that the darkness I had unleashed was now coming for me. And then, the strange things started happening. It began with small, almost imperceptible things. A creak in the floorboards when I was alone in the house. A cold draft that seemed to come from nowhere. The feeling of being watched. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia, the result of my guilt-ridden mind playing tricks on me. But as the days went on, the incidents became more frequent, more unsettling. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a faint whisper, so quiet that I almost thought I had imagined it. But then it came again, clearer this time. My name, spoken in a voice that was both familiar and terrifying. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest, straining to hear. The house was silent, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. I glanced around the room, my eyes searching for anything out of place, but everything looked normal. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that I was letting my guilt and fear get the better of me. But deep down I knew something was wrong, terribly wrong. The next day I couldn't concentrate on anything. My mind kept replaying the events of the night before, trying to make sense of what had happened. The whisper, the feeling of being watched, it all felt too real to be just my imagination. But what could it be? That evening, as I was sitting on the couch trying to distract myself with TV, I heard it again. The whisper, soft and insistent, coming from somewhere behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. The room was empty, just like before. My heart raced as I stood up, my eyes scanning the room. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" There was no response, just silence. But the feeling of being watched was so strong that it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I took a step forward, my hands clenched into fists, trying to steady my breathing. "Show yourself," I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. The whisper came again, closer this time. My name, spoken in that same eerie, familiar voice. And then I saw it. A shadow, just at the edge of my vision, flickering in the dim light. It was gone as soon as I turned to look at it. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. Something, or someone, was in the house with me. Panic surged through me as I backed away, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. It had to be a trick, a hallucination brought on by stress and guilt. But the fear that gripped me was all too real. I grabbed my keys and bolted out the front door, not stopping until I was in my car, the doors locked securely behind me. I sat there, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of what was happening. What had I done? What had I unleashed? I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove aimlessly around town, too afraid to go back to the house. I ended up at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, where I checked in under a fake name, paying in cash. The clerk gave me a strange look, but I didn't care. I just needed to be somewhere safe, somewhere I could try to figure out what was happening. But even in the motel room, the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. I couldn't shake the sense that I had brought something with me, something dark and malevolent that was now haunting me. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard the whisper, felt the cold breath on the back of my neck. I tossed and turned, my mind a chaotic mess of fear and regret. I had wanted revenge, but now I was the one being tormented, hunted by the very darkness I had unleashed. By the time the sun rose, I was exhausted, but the fear had only grown stronger. I couldn't stay in the motel forever, but the thought of returning home filled me with dread. What if it was waiting for me? What if I had nowhere to run? I knew I couldn't keep this up. I needed help, needed to talk to someone who could make sense of what was happening to me. But who? I couldn't go to the police. They'd think I was crazy. And I couldn't go to Mark. He'd never believe me. As I sat there, my mind racing, I realized there was only one person who might understand: Sarah. She was the one who had warned me not to let the anger consume me, the one who had seen the darkness in me before I had even recognized it myself. But after everything I had done, would she even talk to me? Would she even care? I didn't have a choice. I had to try. Because if I didn't, I knew I wouldn't survive whatever was coming for me. With a deep breath, I grabbed my phone and dialed her number, praying she would pick up. The phone rang twice before I heard her voice, soft, hesitant, but unmistakably hers. "Tom?" "Sarah," I said, my voice trembling with relief. "I need to see you, please. I need your help." There was a pause, and for a moment I thought she was going to hang up. But then she spoke again, her voice filled with concern. "Tom, what's going on? You sound different." "I can't explain it over the phone," I said quickly. "Please, Sarah, I need to see you. It's urgent." Another long pause, and then she sighed. "Okay, meet me at the park, the one near our old apartment, in an hour." "I'll be there," I said, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. As I hung up the phone, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maybe, just maybe, Sarah could help me make sense of what was happening. Maybe she could help me find a way to stop it. But as I drove towards the park, the whispers followed me, a constant reminder that the darkness I had unleashed was still there, still waiting. And I knew that whatever happened next, there was no turning back. The drive to the park felt like an eternity, the anxiety gnawing at me with every mile. The whispers had faded, but their presence lingered, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something or someone sitting in the back seat. But the car was empty, just as it should be. Yet the feeling of being watched persisted, and with it, a deepening sense of dread. When I finally pulled into the parking lot, I spotted Sarah sitting on a bench under the large oak tree where we used to meet when we first started dating. She looked different, tired, worn, as if the weight of everything that had happened was bearing down on her. For a moment I hesitated. What right did I have to drag her back into this nightmare? But then the whispers returned, faint but unmistakable, and I knew I didn't have a choice. I stepped out of the car and made my way towards her, my heart pounding. Sarah looked up as I approached, her expression unreadable. I could see the caution in her eyes, the uncertainty. She had every reason to hate me, to walk away and never look back. But she didn't. She stayed, waiting for me to speak. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice hoarse. She nodded but didn't say anything. Her gaze locked onto mine. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Sarah, I know I've done terrible things I can't take back. But something's happening to me, something I don't understand. I think I've unleashed something dark, and it's coming after me." She stared at me, her expression softening slightly. "Tom, what are you talking about? You're scaring me." "I'm scared too," I admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I've been hearing things, whispers, voices, and I've seen shadows, things that shouldn't be there. I can't explain it, but I feel like I'm being haunted, like something is trying to punish me for what I've done." Sarah's eyes widened, and for a moment I thought she might dismiss me as crazy. But instead, she leaned closer, her voice gentle. "Tom, I believe you. I can see it in your eyes. Something's changed in you. But I don't think it's a ghost or a demon. I think it's guilt." "Guilt?" I echoed, confused. "But it feels so real." "Guilt can be powerful, Tom. It can make you see and hear things that aren't there. And after everything you've been through, everything we've both been through, it's not surprising that your mind is reacting this way." I shook my head, unwilling to accept that explanation. "But the whispers, they're so real. I can feel them, Sarah. It's like they're coming from inside me. She reached out, placing a hand on my arm. Tom, I think the darkness you're talking about isn't something supernatural. It's inside you, inside all of us. It's the part of you that's been consumed by anger, by revenge. You let it take over, and now it's eating you alive. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, the truth in them undeniable. I had allowed my anger to turn me into something unrecognizable, something twisted and vengeful. And now, that darkness was consuming me from within. But how do I stop it? I asked, my voice cracking. How do I make it go away? Sarah hesitated, as if searching for the right words. Tom, I'm not sure I have the answer. But I think the first step is to confront what you've done, to face the guilt, the shame, and to try to find some way to make amends. Amends? I repeated, the idea almost foreign to me now. How? I've ruined everything. You're still here, Tom, she said softly. You're still alive. That means you have a chance to make things right, even if it's just a small step. You have to start by forgiving yourself, by acknowledging what you've done and accepting the consequences. Only then can you begin to heal. I wanted to believe her, to think that there was a way out of this darkness. But the guilt and anger were so deeply ingrained, so much a part of me now, that I didn't know if I could ever let them go. Sarah, I don't know if I can do that, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and compassion. You're the only one who can decide that, Tom. But I believe you can find a way, if you're willing to try. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. It was faint, barely more than a flicker, but it was there. I realized that the whispers, the shadows, and the sense of being haunted were all manifestations of the guilt and rage I had allowed to fester inside me. And if I wanted to rid myself of them, I had to confront the truth head-on, no matter how painful it might be. As we sat there in the park, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the ground, I began to open up to Sarah in a way I hadn't before. I told her everything, about the cameras, the spying, the letter I had sent to David's company, and the car accident I had orchestrated. I laid it all bare, the ugliness of my actions spilling out in a torrent of regret and shame. Sarah listened in silence, her expression unreadable, but she didn't pull away. When I was finished, she sighed, a deep, heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of all we had lost. Tom, she said after a long pause, what you did was wrong, but I can see that you know that now, and that's the first step towards making things right. But how? I asked, desperate for some kind of direction. What can I do to make up for what I've done? She looked at me, her gaze steady. You need to own up to your actions, Tom. You need to apologize to those you've hurt, and you need to accept whatever consequences come your way. It won't be easy, but it's the only way to start healing. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. Owning up to what I had done meant facing the reality of my actions, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that. But as I sat there, looking into Sarah's eyes, I realized that I didn't have a choice. If I wanted to stop the darkness from consuming me entirely, I had to take the first step. I'll do it, I said, my voice trembling with fear and determination. I'll make things right, Sarah. I don't know how, but I'll try. She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. That's all you can do, Tom. Just take it one step at a time. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of our conversation hanging in the air. There was still so much left unsaid between us, so many wounds that needed time to heal. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like there was a path forward, no matter how difficult it might be. The next day, I woke up with a sense of purpose, something I hadn't felt in weeks. I knew that the road ahead would be long and painful, but I was ready to face it. I spent the morning gathering all the evidence I had collected against David, the emails, the texts, the recordings. I packed them into a box, knowing that I would need them for what I was about to do. Then I made the hardest phone call of my life. Hello? This is Tom Harris. I need to report a crime. The words felt surreal coming out of my mouth, but I knew they were necessary. I explained everything to the officer on the other end of the line, how I had collected evidence against my wife and her boss, how I had sent an anonymous letter to David's company, and how I had sabotaged his car, leading to the accident. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, the officer spoke. "Mr. Harris, I'm going to need you to come down to the station to make a formal statement. Are you willing to do that?" I hesitated, the weight of my decision pressing down on me. But then I remembered Sarah's words, the way she had looked at me with compassion and understanding, even after everything I had done. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I'll be there." The drive to the police station felt like a journey towards my own execution. My hands shook on the steering wheel, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. But I knew this was the right thing to do, the only thing I could do if I wanted to free myself from the darkness that had taken hold of me. When I arrived, I was led into a small, sterile room where I was asked to sit and wait. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one filled with the weight of my impending confession. Finally, a detective entered the room, a stern look on his face as he sat down across from me. "Mr. Harris," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I understand you have something to tell us." I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, I've done some terrible things, and I need to make it right." Over the next hour, I recounted everything I had done, from the moment I first suspected Sarah's affair to the day I orchestrated David's accident. The detective listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes, but mostly letting me speak. By the time I finished, I felt drained, as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders but replaced with the heavy burden of responsibility. When I was done, the detective leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Harris, what you've done is very serious. There will be legal consequences, and you may face charges for your actions. But I appreciate your honesty, and the fact that you've come forward voluntarily will be taken into account." I nodded, too exhausted to speak. I knew this was just the beginning, that the road ahead would be filled with challenges and hardships. But for the first time, I felt a sense of relief, as if the darkness that had been suffocating me was starting to lift. As I left the station, I realized that the whispers had stopped. The shadows that had haunted me were gone, replaced by a quiet, tentative sense of peace. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but it was a start, and for now, that was enough. I returned home that evening, the house still and silent, but no longer filled with the oppressive sense of dread that had plagued me for so long. I knew I had a long journey ahead, but I also knew that I wasn't alone. Sarah had agreed to stand by me, to help me navigate the difficult path of redemption. It wouldn't be easy, but I was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. I sat down on the couch, staring out the window as the sun set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. The darkness outside seemed less threatening now, less suffocating. I could still feel its presence, but it no longer held the same power over me. I had taken the first step towards confronting it, towards reclaiming my life. As I sat there, I thought about what Sarah had said, about forgiveness, about making amends. It was a long road, but for the first time, I felt like I could see the way forward. The darkness was still there, lurking at the edges of my vision, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had faced it, and I had survived. Now, it was time to rebuild, one step at a time.